What happens when our deepest assumptions about human worth are shattered in a single moment? When the person we've rendered invisible suddenly commands the room with a voice that speaks truth in a language we never expected. Picture this: a gleaming Manhattan boardroom filled with executives in $1,000 suits, their laptops open, their confidence absolute. A Saudi billionaire sits at the head of the table, speaking in his native Arabic as translation apps fumble and fail. The deal of a lifetime hangs in the balance. And then, from the shadows where she's been cleaning, unnoticed and underestimated, a black woman in maintenance blues stands up and responds in perfect classical Arabic dot. Her name was Nia Harper, and for 3 years she had been nothing more than a ghost haunting the halls of Halberton Towers after midnight. Her mop swept across marble floors, while executives climbed ladders of success built on assumptions about who deserves to be heard, who deserves to be seen, and who deserves to have their intelligence recognized. This is not just a story about one remarkable woman. It's a story about the linguistic racism that pervades our workplaces, the class bias that renders entire populations invisible, and the devastating cost of our prejudices. Research shows that employees are interrupted, excluded from meetings, and treated as less competent simply because of their accent or perceived language skills. It's about how we judge intelligence by accent, worth by job title, and potential by the color of someone's skin or the uniform they wear. But most importantly, it's a story about resilience, about the quiet dignity of those who persist despite being overlooked, and about the moment when truth finally breaks through the barriers of bias to change everything. A. Harper's story began long before that pivotal night in the Halberton Towers boardroom. Born in Detroit to parents who cleaned office buildings themselves, she learned early that intelligence and circumstances don't always align. Her mother, Denise, had been a teacher in Jamaica before immigrating to the United States, only to find her credentials didn't transfer, and her accent was deemed too thick for American classrooms. Education is the one thing they can never take from you, Denise would tell young Nia as they rode the bus home from the buildings where she worked double shifts. But as Nia would later discover, they could certainly try to diminish its value. Growing up in 1990s Detroit, Nia witnessed the devastating effects of workplace discrimination firsthand. Her father, Marcus, had been laid off from the auto plant when she was 12, and despite his mechanical expertise, couldn't find work that paid a living wage. Employers took one look at his inner-city address and made assumptions about his capabilities. The family learned to navigate a world where zip codes determined worthiness, where skin color influenced first impressions, and where working class backgrounds were seen as intellectual limitations rather than sources of resilience and practical wisdom. Nia excelled in school despite these challenges, earning a full scholarship to study Arabic and Middle Eastern studies at the University of Michigan. Her professors were impressed by her natural aptitude for languages and her deep understanding of cultural nuances. She spent a summer in Morocco, perfecting her classical Arabic and developing fluency in multiple dialects. Her thesis on cross-cultural business communication earned departmental honors. But just as she was preparing for graduate school at Oxford University, a dream that seemed impossible given her family's financial situation, life intervened with devastating swiftness. Her younger brother, Jerome, was diagnosed with leukemia at age 16. Her mother's part-time work provided minimal health insurance, and the family faced the impossible choice between Nia's future and Jerome's survival. There was no choice at all, really. Nia deferred Oxford indefinitely, took out loans, and moved home to help care for Jerome while working multiple jobs to pay for his treatment. She tutored wealthy suburban kids in Arabic for $50 an hour during the day, and cleaned office buildings with her mother at night. The suburban parents loved having their children learn from someone so exotic and accomplished. but they never invited Nia to their dinner parties or treated her as an equal despite her obvious education and sophistication. Jerome recovered, but the family's finances never did. By the time Nia could have reconsidered Oxford, years had passed. Her academic credentials felt stale, and the confidence she'd once carried had been eroded by constant dismissal and financial stress. She found herself caught in the trap that snares so many working-class intellectuals, overqualified for minimum-wage jobs, but lacking the connections and resources to access positions that matched her abilities. When Nia moved to New York City in 2018, she took the night janitor position at Halberton Towers because it offered something precious: anonymity and thinking time. The building housed 3 major investment firms, 2 consulting companies, and a prestigious international law firm. While she mopped and emptied trash bins, she overheard boardroom conversations about global markets, cultural differences, and cross-border negotiations. She listened to executives struggle with pronunciation of foreign names, watched them rely on Google Translate for communications with international clients, and observed the subtle ways they dismissed or marginalized anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of professional competence. The irony wasn't lost on her. She possessed exactly the skills these companies desperately needed: cultural fluency, linguistic expertise, and the kind of intercultural intelligence that can't be taught in business school. But she was invisible to them, just another member of the army of black and brown women who kept their offices clean and their lives comfortable. During those 3 years of night shifts, Nia watched a parade of consultants come and go, hired at exorbitant rates to provide cultural training and language services that she could have delivered with far greater authenticity and insight. She saw young MBA graduates stumble through presentations about Middle Eastern markets, mispronouncing basic terms and demonstrating profound ignorance about regional differences. She witnessed deals fall through because of cultural misunderstandings that she could have prevented with a 10-minute conversation. But she remained silent, invisible, just another janitor pushing a cart through corridors of power where her voice was neither sought nor welcomed. The morning of March 15, 2021, arrived with unusual energy at Halberton Towers. Khalid al-Sahim, one of Saudi Arabia's most influential businessmen and philanthropist, was scheduled to meet with Meridian Capital, the building's premier investment firm, about a potential $2.8 billion renewable energy deal. His foundation had been quietly investing in sustainable technology across the Middle East, and Meridian wanted to position themselves as his gateway to American markets. Senior partners had spent weeks preparing for this meeting. They hired external consultants, practiced pronunciation of Arabic phrases, and even brought in cultural sensitivity trainers. The conference room gleamed with polished surfaces and fresh flowers, while a small army of staff ensured every detail was perfect. The translation equipment had been tested multiple times, and 3 different Arabic interpreters were on standby via video conference. Nia began her shift at 11 p.m. the night before, as she had every weeknight for 3 years. She worked methodically through the building's 37 floors, timing her route to avoid the morning rush of arriving executives. She had learned to read the building's rhythms, which floors would be busy early, which partners preferred their offices cleaned after they left, and how to remain invisible while still doing thorough work. As she cleaned the executive conference room at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the Al-Sahim meeting, she overheard final preparations. Marketing Director Marina Volkov was practicing what she clearly thought was Arabic, but was actually mangled Lebanese dialect mixed with Egyptian slang. "Ahlan wa sahlan, Mr. Al-Sahim," she repeated, her pronunciation so off that Nia involuntarily winced. The phrase meant welcome, but Marina was essentially saying, "Hello, Mr. Sands. The cultural brief says we should serve Arabic coffee and dates," said junior partner David Chun, shuffling through papers. Apparently, it's important to show cultural appreciation. Nia continued dusting nearby surfaces, noting that they had ordered Turkish coffee instead of traditional kahwa, and the dates were stuffed with cream cheese, a combination that would likely seem bizarre to their distinguished guest. These weren't malicious errors, but they demonstrated the surface-level approach that often passes for cultural competence in corporate settings. At 8:30 a.m., as Nia was finishing the adjacent offices, Khalid al-Sahim arrived with a small entourage. Even through the glass walls, his presence commanded attention. Tall and distinguished, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. His assistants were deferential but professional, speaking to him in rapid Arabic that Nia immediately recognized as the formal, classical variety used in business and academic settings. The meeting began promptly at 9 a.m. Nia should have been long gone, but she was running behind schedule due to a spill on the 23rd floor. She found herself cleaning the hallway outside the conference room just as the presentations began. Through the glass, she could see the Meridian team's confident smiles and al-Sahim's polite but increasingly puzzled expression. 20 minutes into the meeting, something went wrong with the remote interpretation system. The video conference connection failed, leaving the primary Arabic interpreter staring at a frozen screen. The backup interpreter was stuck in traffic, and the third was dealing with a family emergency. Marina Volkov, leading the presentation, made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. al-Sahim," she said, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone in full panic mode, "we're having some technical difficulties, but we have translation apps that should work perfectly well. We can certainly continue." Al-Sahim nodded, politely, but Nia could see his expression shift. Having attended dozens of international business meetings during her university years as a student interpreter, she recognized the look of someone being offered an inferior substitute and wondering if this was indicative of the partnership they were considering. Marina pulled out her phone and opened a translation app. "We're very excited about this joint venture," she said slowly, waiting for the app to process her words. The Arabic translation that emerged was grammatically correct, but culturally tone-deaf, using overly casual language inappropriate for formal business discussions. Al-Sahim responded in Arabic, speaking directly to the phone, but instead of the measured business Arabic he had been using with his assistants, he switched to a more complex dialectical form, perhaps testing the technology's limitations. The app struggled, producing a translation that made little sense. "We appreciate the friendship of money and solar items." The Meridian team exchanged nervous glances. Marina tried again, speaking slower and simpler. "Can you tell us about your foundation's goals?" The app translated this adequately, and al-Sahim responded, but he was clearly growing frustrated with the stilted, impersonal nature of the exchange. Then, perhaps testing just how much the technology was failing them, al-Sahim addressed the room in rapid, formal Arabic. Nia's breath caught as she recognized not just the language, but the specific content. He was questioning whether Meridian truly understood the cultural and religious considerations that were fundamental to his foundations. Work. He spoke of the importance of authentic partnership, of working with people who respected the nuances of Middle Eastern business culture, and of his concerns that American firms often treated international clients as mere sources of capital rather than partners with deep-rooted values and complex needs. The translation app caught perhaps every third word, offering the nonsensical interpretation. "Religion of work is important. Money from America, maybe not understanding. Partnership requires heart of knowledge." The silence that followed was deafening. Marina looked helplessly at her colleagues. David Shun stared at his laptop screen as if willing it to provide better answers. Senior partner Robert Halberton, who had built his reputation on never showing uncertainty, appeared genuinely lost. It was in this moment of corporate paralysis that Naya made a decision that would alter the trajectory of her life. Still holding her cleaning cart, still wearing her maintenance uniform with Nia embroidered in simple letters on the pocket, she gently knocked on the conference room door. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I apologize for interrupting, but I couldn't help but notice the translation difficulties." Marina whirled around, irritation flashing across her face. "We're in the middle of an important meeting," she snapped, then caught herself and forced a smile. "I'm sure we can manage our technical issues." But Al-Sahim had noticed something the others had missed. When Nia spoke, she had unconsciously oriented herself toward him in the respectful manner appropriate for addressing a distinguished elder in Arab culture. Her posture and tone conveyed the kind of cultural awareness that the Meridian team's expensive consultants had failed to provide. He looked at her directly and spoke in Arabic. "Do you understand what I have been saying?" The room went completely silent. Every head turned toward the janitor with the mop in her hands. And then, in a voice soft but clear, using the formal dialect appropriate for business discussions, Nia responded in flawless Arabic. "You honor us with your presence and your wisdom, sir. You have expressed concerns about finding true partnership collaboration, built on mutual respect and cultural understanding rather than mere financial opportunity. You seek partners who appreciate that your foundation's work is rooted in values that transcend simple profit, and you wonder whether American firms can offer the authentic relationship your vision requires." The moment Nia finished speaking, the silence in the conference room was electric. Al-Sahim's eyebrows rose in surprise and what appeared to be genuine delight. The Meridian executives sat frozen, their assumptions crumbling in real time as they struggled to process what had just occurred. "Subhan-Allah," Al-Sahim murmured, a phrase of wonder that required no translation. He continued in Arabic, asking Nia about her background, her education, and how she had learned to speak his language with such precision and cultural sensitivity. As Nia responded, explaining her academic background and her time in Morocco, the corporate executives found themselves witnessing a conversation they couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. The easy familiarity between Al-Sahim and this woman they had completely overlooked was becoming impossible to dismiss. Marina Volkov was the first to recover her composure, though her smile had taken on a brittle quality. "Well, isn't that ... convenient," she said, her tone carrying undertones that every person of color in corporate America would recognize. "How fortunate that our cleaning staff happens to speak Arabic." Al-Sahim turned to Marina with an expression of cool assessment. "In English," he said, "this woman has just demonstrated more cultural competence and linguistic skill than I have encountered in most international business meetings. Perhaps you could explain to me why someone with her obvious qualifications is cleaning your floors instead of leading your cultural integration efforts?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Robert Halberton, the senior partner whose name graced the building, stammered something about personnel decisions and appropriate channels, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. What followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable hour in Meridian Capital's corporate history. With Nia serving as interpreter, Al-Sahim was able to express his vision with the nuance and complexity that the translation technology had mangled. He spoke of sustainable development projects that would employ local workers, respect traditional land uses, and integrate modern technology with cultural values. He described his foundation's work supporting education for women and girls across the Middle East, and his desire to partner with American firms that shared these deeper commitments to social responsibility. For the first time, the Meridian team began to understand the true scope of what they were being offered, not just a financial investment, but partnership in a comprehensive approach to development that could reshape entire regions while generating substantial returns. But even as the meeting progressed successfully, with Al-Sahim growing increasingly engaged with the projects Meridian presented, an undercurrent of tension was building. Nia could feel the resentment emanating from several team members, particularly Marina, who had spent weeks positioning herself as the cultural expert for this deal. When the meeting concluded 2 hours later than scheduled, Al-Sahim requested a private word with Nia. As the executives reluctantly filed out, he spoke to her in Arabic about her remarkable skills and obvious education. "You studied at Oxford," he said, switching to English so there could be no misunderstanding. "I can hear it in your formal Arabic training, which makes me curious about why you are here with a mop instead of in a position that utilizes your considerable talents." Nia found herself telling him about Jerome's illness, her deferred dreams, and the financial realities that had led her to this position. Al-Sahim listened without judgment, occasionally nodding with the understanding of someone who had seen talent wasted by circumstances in many parts of the world. "I would like to offer you something," he said finally. "My foundation provides educational grants for individuals whose potential has been constrained by circumstances beyond their control. The grant would cover completion of your graduate education, or if you prefer, seed funding for a business initiative of your choosing. The only requirement is that you use your success to create opportunities for others facing similar barriers." Before Nia could respond, Marina Volkov reappeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of forced cheerfulness and barely contained hostility. "Mr. Al-Sahim, I hope you understand that Nia is a valued member of our team," she said, her emphasis on valued dripping with condescension. "We certainly wouldn't want to lose her valuable custodial services." The insult was deliberate and unmistakable. Al-Sahim's expression hardened, and he responded in Arabic that was too rapid and idiomatic for the translation. "Apt to catch. This woman possesses more wisdom and cultural understanding than your entire company has demonstrated today. The fact that you cannot recognize this reveals everything I need to know about your organization's values." Marina smiled and nodded, having understood nothing except the tone, which was clearly not complimentary. Over the following days, word of the incident spread through Halberton Towers with the speed of corporate gossip. The story grew in the telling some versions had Nia speaking 7 languages. Others claimed she was secretly a Saudi princess, and a few insisted she had somehow tricked her way into the meeting. But the reaction from Meridian Capital's leadership was swift and predictable. Within 48 hours, Nia was called into an HR meeting where she faced Marina Volkov and HR Director Patricia Chun, both wearing expressions of professional concern that barely masked their hostility. "Nia, we need to discuss your intervention." During the Al-Sahim meeting, Marina began, consulting a folder of documents. "We have some concerns about appropriate boundaries and professional conduct." "Concerns?" Nia asked, though she could already see where this conversation was heading. "Well, you interrupted a high-level business meeting without permission," Patricia said, reading from her notes. "You engaged in unauthorized interaction with a client, and you failed to follow proper protocols for reporting specialized skills that could be relevant to company operations." The accusations were absurd, but Nia recognized the corporate machinery of retaliation grinding into motion. They were creating a paper trail, documenting supposed infractions that could justify disciplinary action or termination. "We're prepared to offer you a transfer to our Cultural Liaison Department," Marina continued, her tone suggesting this was an act of remarkable generosity. "Of course, it would be a part-time position, and the salary would be competitive with your current compensation." The offer was insulting a token position that would allow them to claim they had recognized her skills while ensuring she remained marginalized and financially vulnerable. Nia realized that her moment of courage had threatened something fundamental about their worldview. and they were determined to restore the natural order that kept people like her invisible and powerless. 3 days after the humiliating HR meeting, Nia received a phone call that would force her to make the most important decision of her life. Khalid al-Sahim's assistant, speaking in formal Arabic, invited her to meet with the philanthropist at his Manhattan hotel suite to discuss the educational grant he had offered. The Meridian executives had made it clear that accepting any external offers would constitute a conflict of interest and grounds for immediate termination. They had also hinted that they would provide negative references to any future employer who inquired about her work history. The message was clear: stay in your lane, accept our token offer, or face professional destruction. But Nia had spent 3 years watching corporate America up close, and she understood something the executives didn't. Their power was largely illusory, built on the consent of those they sought to control. She had skills they needed, relationships they couldn't access, and most importantly, she had nothing left to lose. The meeting with al-Sahim took place in the penthouse suite of the St. Regis, a world away from the service corridors and maintenance closets where Nia had spent her professional life. Al-Sahim greeted her in Arabic, offering traditional hospitality that felt genuine rather than performative. His assistant, a young Saudi woman named Layla, who spoke perfect English with a slight Oxford accent, made Nia feel immediately welcome. "I have been thinking about our conversation," al-Sahim said, switching to English. "Your situation is not uncommon in America. I have met many immigrants, many working-class individuals, whose talents are invisible to the establishment. The waste of human potential is perhaps the greatest tragedy of modern capitalism." He outlined his foundation's approach to educational grants, not merely funding degrees, but creating pathways for recipients to build sustainable careers while maintaining connection to their communities and values. The program included mentorship, professional networking, and most importantly, the expectation that grant recipients would eventually create opportunities for others. "I am also offering you something else," al-Sahim continued. "My foundation is expanding its American operations, and we need someone to serve as Director of Cultural Integration. The position would involve working with American companies who want to develop authentic relationships with Middle Eastern partners, providing the kind of cultural intelligence that cannot be purchased from consulting firms." The offer was extraordinary: a 6-figure salary, comprehensive benefits, and the opportunity to build something meaningful. But it came with a catch that al-Sahim stated explicitly. You would need to be willing to challenge the assumptions and prejudices of very powerful people. You would be representing not just my foundation, but everyone who has been overlooked because of their background, their accent, or their circumstances. Nia understood that accepting this position would make her a target. She would be scrutinized, criticized, and probably undermined by people who couldn't accept that someone from her background possessed expertise they lacked. But she also understood that this was her chance to break the cycle of invisibility that had trapped not just her, but countless others. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marina Volkov. "Final offer on cultural liaison position expires today at 5 p.m. After that, we'll have to explore other options for your future with the company." The threat was unsubtle: accept our terms or face termination. But as Nia looked around the elegant hotel suite, listened to al-Sahim and Layla discuss their vision for authentic cross-cultural partnerships, and considered the possibility of using her skills to create real change, the choice became clear. "I accept your offer," she told al-Sahim, "both the grant and the position." 2 hours later, Nia walked into the Meridian Capital offices for what she knew would be the last time as an employee. She found Marina Volkov and Patricia Chun waiting. In the conference room where this had all begun, their expressions a mixture of triumph and vindictive satisfaction. "Nia, we understand you've decided not to accept our generous offer," Marina began, consulting her ever-present folder of documents. "Unfortunately, that leaves us with no choice but to, I resign," Nia said simply, placing a brief letter on the polished conference table, effective immediately. The silence that followed was delicious. Marina had clearly prepared for a termination meeting, complete with security escort and legal warnings about confidentiality. Nia's resignation disrupted their narrative of corporate power and employee powerlessness. "You do realize," Patricia said, recovering first, "that without our recommendation, you'll find it very difficult to secure comparable employment in this industry." Nia smiled, thinking of the contract she had just signed with Al Sahim's foundation. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't think that will be a problem." As she gathered her few personal belongings from her maintenance locker, Nia felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The janitor was leaving the building. But the woman who walked out into the Manhattan afternoon was someone entirely different, a cultural bridge builder, an advocate for the overlooked, and proof that intelligence and worth exist in places where power rarely thinks to look. 6 months later, Dr. Nia Harper, she had completed her Oxford degree through Al Sahim Foundation's accelerated program, stood before a packed auditorium at the International Business Culture Summit in Dubai. Her presentation, "Beyond Translation: Building Authentic Cross-Cultural Partnerships," drew standing ovations from an audience of Fortune 500 executives, diplomatic officials, and cultural scholars. The transformation had been remarkable, but not effortless. As the Al Sahim Foundation's Director of Cultural Integration, Nia had faced exactly the skepticism and resistance that Al Sahim had predicted. Corporate executives questioned her credentials, assumed she was a diversity hire, and tested her knowledge with a kind of aggressive scrutiny rarely applied to white male consultants with similar backgrounds. But Nia had something her critics lacked: authentic expertise gained through lived experience, not theoretical study. When Meridian Capital's competitors began seeking her services for their own Middle Eastern partnerships, when the State Department consulted her on cultural sensitivity training, and when Harvard Business School invited her to guest lecture, the narrative began to shift. The Meridian Capital story became a cautionary tale in business schools and corporate training programs. The company had lost the Al Sahim deal within weeks of Nia's resignation, not because of any vindictive action on her part, but because Al Sahim had seen enough of their corporate culture to conclude they were not suitable partners. Marina Volkov left the company 6 months later, her reputation damaged by association with one of the most expensive cultural missteps in the firm's history. But Nia's real success wasn't measured in corporate comeuppance or personal vindication. It was visible in the lives she had begun to change through the Al Sahim Foundation's expanded programs. The Foundation's Hidden Talents Initiative provided educational grants and career development support for working-class individuals with language skills, cultural knowledge, or other expertise that traditional employers had overlooked. Nia personally mentored 12 grant recipients in the program's first year, helping them navigate the treacherous waters of corporate culture while maintaining their authenticity and values. There was Hassan al-Nayr, a Syrian refugee with a computer science degree who had been working as a security guard while his credentials were being validated. Nia's intervention helped him secure a position as a systems analyst with a tech company that valued his multilingual abilities and Middle Eastern market knowledge. Maria Santos, a Guatemalan immigrant who cleaned office buildings while completing her accounting degree at night, received foundation support to obtain her CPA certification. She now runs her own practice specializing in tax services for immigrant-owned small businesses. James Okafor, a Nigerian janitor with a PhD in chemistry, whose credentials weren't recognized in the United States, was able to complete the additional coursework needed to practice in America. He now leads a research team developing sustainable energy solutions for rural communities. Each success story rippled outward, creating opportunities for others and challenging the assumptions that kept talent invisible. Companies began to reconsider their hiring practices, their definitions of cultural competence, and their understanding of where valuable expertise might be found. The personal impact on Nia was equally profound. She had moved from a studio apartment in Queens to a brownstone in Brooklyn, but more importantly, she had moved from invisibility to influence. Her voice now carried weight in conversations about immigration policy, workplace discrimination, and educational equity. She spoke regularly at universities, sharing her story not as inspiration porn, but as a case study in systemic barriers and individual resilience. She testified before Congress about linguistic discrimination in the workplace, drawing on research from her own foundation's studies of bias in hiring and promotion practices. Most importantly, she had kept her promise to Al-Sahim. The foundation's programs had created a network of cultural bridges, people who could translate not just languages but experiences, helping American businesses develop authentic relationships with global partners while creating opportunities for overlooked talent at home. That the program expanded beyond Middle Eastern cultures to include expertise in African, Asian, and Latin American markets. Each initiative was led by someone who had lived the experience of being underestimated because of their background, their accent, or their circumstances. 3 years after that pivotal morning in the Halberton Towers conference room, Nia Harper had become exactly what Al-Sahim had seen in her from the beginning. Not just a translator of words, but a translator of worlds, building bridges across the chasms of misunderstanding that divide cultures, classes, and communities. The janitor had not only left the building, she had transformed the entire landscape of what was possible. Today, when we walk past the janitors, security guards, food service workers, and other invisible armies that keep our institutions functioning, we might pause to wonder, what languages do they speak that we've never heard? What expertise have they gained through experiences we've never valued? What problems could they solve if we bothered to listen? Nia Harper's story is not unique in its elements. Countless immigrants, working-class individuals, and people of color possess skills and knowledge that remain hidden from those with power to recognize and reward them. What makes her story remarkable is that it didn't end in quiet resignation or bitter acceptance of limited options. It ended in transformation, not just of one life, but of entire systems of assumption and exclusion. The linguistic racism that nearly silenced Nia continues to operate in workplaces across America. Employees are still interrupted in meetings because of their accents, excluded from opportunities because of their surnames, and dismissed as incompetent because they speak differently than those in power. A class bias that rendered her invisible still determines whose intelligence is acknowledged and whose expertise is valued. But Nia's story also demonstrates that these systems are not immutable. When we choose to see beyond our prejudices, when we listen to voices we've been trained to ignore, when we create opportunities for talent to flourish regardless of its packaging, we don't just change individual lives, we strengthen entire communities and organizations. The next time you encounter someone whose accent sounds unfamiliar, whose job title seems humble, or whose background differs from your own, remember the woman who stood up in that Manhattan boardroom and spoke truth in a language that no one expected her to know. Remember that intelligence and worth are not distributed according to our convenience or comfort, and that the most transformative insights often come from the most unexpected sources. In a world that too often silences the voices it most needs to hear, Nia Harper chose to speak. And in speaking, she reminded us all that our assumptions about human potential are often our greatest barriers to human progress. The question is not whether there are other Nia Harpers among us. There certainly are. The question is whether we will have the wisdom to listen when they finally choose to speak.